For most of human history, the known world extended only as far as the light of a campfire. Beyond that illuminated circle lay a vast, pitch-black wilderness, a void that our brains, hardwired to anticipate danger, eventually populated with monsters. This encyclopedia of fear catalogs how almost every culture on Earth developed a remarkably similar taxonomy of horror. Across European folklore, indigenous American legends, and Indian mythology, we find the same core threats: shape-changers, vengeful spirits, and forest giants. The Algonquian legend of the Wendigo serves as a perfect example of this environmental dread. It appears as a gaunt, towering monstrosity, but it is effectively the physical manifestation of extreme winter starvation and the biological taboo of cannibalism. Half a world away, the Yeti represents the Himalayan version of this wilderness threat. It is a massive apex predator roaming treacherous peaks, embodying the lethal unpredictability of the snow and the crushing weight of high altitudes. For ancient civilizations, monsters represented the literal face of a lethal environment, one where survival was never guaranteed and nature was far from conquered. In the jungles of ancient India, the threat took a more sophisticated form. The Rakshasa possessed monstrous strength, but their true danger lay in their intellect. These entities were masters of Maya, the power of illusion. They could manipulate human perception and strike exactly when their prey was most psychologically vulnerable. Humanity attempted to solve this threat by building the first cities. We raised high walls of stone and wood, operating under the assumption that a physical boundary could provide permanent protection against the dark. This enclosure strategy eventually failed. By building walls, we didn't leave the monsters behind. We simply forced them to follow us into our most intimate spaces. Modernization turned our fear inward. We were no longer fighting the wilderness daily, so our anxieties shifted toward the threats within our own walls: disease, communal sin, and the unnatural dead. The Romanian strigoi represents the ultimate domestic violation. This restless spirit returns from the grave to drain the life force of its own living family members, a concept of eternal parasitism that exists entirely within the safety of the home. Indian folklore warns of a different corruption, the pishacha. Dwelling in the thick smoke of cremation grounds, this flesh-eating demon embodies the horror of the body's decay, haunting the threshold between the living and the dead. This section of the taxonomy highlights another domestic dread, the Chudile, or Churel. Defined by her backward-turned feet, she is a manifestation of maternal trauma, a woman who died in childbirth, returning as a predator to the household she was forced to leave. These spirits represent a collective fear of the past refusing to stay buried. They haunt the very people who should have been most protected by the bonds of family and community. When the monster stops being a ghost and starts being a neighbor, the threat becomes purely psychological. This is the realm of the shapeshifter, entities like the European werewolf or the Indian Nagin, where the predator wears human skin. Looking at these two entries, we can see how different cultures interpret transformation. The classic European werewolf is typically a victim of a curse, while the Navajo skinwalker makes a malevolent, deliberate choice to assume animal form. The shapeshifter's power lies in the unsettling recognition of human malice, looking back through the eyes of a beast, a calculating gaze that proves the predator is one of our own. This entity represents the death of trust. It proves that even the most familiar faces can hide a predator, and that our social boundaries are more porous than we like to admit. We paved over the forests and lit the graveyards with sodium lamps, assuming that total visibility would kill our ancient myths. Yet the dread survived by migrating into the locations themselves. Places like the ruins of Bangar Fort remain cursed, even without a specific creature. Modern urban legends have adapted to our concrete grids. The Nale Ba of Bangalore, a spirit that knocks on doors and must be turned away with specific written rules, thrives in the density of modern city streets. This classification shows exactly where our fear lives now, on the internet. Digital folklore like Slender Man replaced visceral blood with faceless dread. Note the core fear listed here: collaborative fictions, monsters born from shared anxieties, creating a mythology out of digital noise. Modern fear has shifted away from the threat of being eaten toward the polite intrusion, the realization that something impossible has quietly slipped into our sterile, heavily guarded reality. The history of monsters is ultimately a history of human imagination. They change shape because our civilizations change shape, continually reflecting the current boundaries of our safety. Over millennia, the distance between the monster and the human body has steadily shrunk. The threat moved from the deep wilderness to the city gates, into our homes, and finally onto the screens we hold inches from our faces. We will always populate the void with horrors. Deep down, we recognize that the only thing more terrifying than a monster in the dark is an empty dark. We are the architects of the dark, and our monsters are the only things that prove we aren't alone in it.